So, Creepshow Art, who at this point you probably know better than your right hand, who I'm sure you've all got very acquainted with during COVID. Shannon has been accused of a lot of things, and pretty much everyone knows what they are at this point. Shannon was accused of stalking Emily Artful for several years, running a lolcow account where she talked all of her friends behind their back, making them sound like really bad people, and showing herself to go against all of the morals she upheld by using a plethora of slurs, doxing one of their siblings, and more. All of this behavior on its own was absolutely disgusting, and when most people found out about it and Shannon told them not to defend her, it really didn't look good for her. Then Shannon came back with this response where she got mad that people didn't defend her. Like, I get it, sometimes innocent people say don't defend me, but I don't think you can exactly get mad at people for not defending you after you tell them not to. But Shannon's response was pretty bad. I went over it on a call with people like Turkey Tom, Augie RFC, Nicholas Diorio. It was awful. The video doesn't address many of the points, goes for character attacks over actually responding to claims made against Shannon, doesn't address the lolcow points at all, and a lot of the evidence that Shannon uses is just incorrect, alongside being from several years ago, making it look even more like she stalked Emily than it initially looked like. But Shannon did make some fair points against Emily. There were fair arguments that I wanted to hear Emily's response on. Luckily, Emily's new video aims to spread light on many of the mistruths that Shannon spreads in this video, raise defenses for many of the arguments Shannon presents against Emily, and to prove Shannon wrong on so many points that Shannon's whole video becomes practically obsolete from a narrative perspective. Before this video begins, you know the gist. If you are new to the channel, please do click subscribe down below. You can also turn on notifications so that if they work, it's up in the air if they actually do, you'll get notified whenever I upload, and you can support me in aiming for 100k in the next few months, a goal I've had for several years now that I'm getting closer and closer to achieving. You can also check out my Twitter if you'd like to support me over there and get to see more of me outside of my regular form of content. Finally, I released a video yesterday. It was a sponsored video, so I would appreciate if you could support it, where I have a bunch of fun with Sister Zio looking at some of the worst YouTube ads and raising many more arguments for why YouTube needs to be more proactive in enacting the terms of service against advertisements just the same as they would for regular content. I would appreciate if you could check out that video, mainly because YouTube seemingly didn't send that video to notifications, and it seems like YouTube just grabbed the video by the balls and crushed them into viscous to the point that the video is just crying in the corner as it bleeds views. What a awful comparison. I'm working with YouTube to get the notification thing resolved. They're sending me a follow back email. But in the meantime, if you could check out that video to support it and to support me, because I presume a lot of people use ad block on this content, so you're basically getting these videos for free. It would be nice if you could support me in that way. That being said, let's get right into the video. Emily's video, I'm Done Shannon, is 1 hour and 30 minutes in length. Obviously, for brevity's sake, I'm not going to cover everything in that video, only the main focal points for things that I think are important for this video. So if you'd like to see the video in its entirety, I'd suggest going to watch it on Emily's channel, as it'll expand upon many of the other points Shannon makes and shows Shannon to be an unreliable narrator. With that being said though, let's get right into it.
Half of the, quote, evidence she supplied was from long past deleted or defunct accounts and videos, things she would have had to archive when they were first available. She took posts I made as a child, a mentally ill child that was going through constant and drastic psych medication changes, evaluations, as well as multiple misdiagnoses, and she used this information to attempt to smear me now as an adult. Because as we all know, the things we do as children directly relate to the kind of adult we will become. So if you were dramatic on the internet when you were 12, then that must make you a liar as an adult. Sorry about the heavy sarcasm there, it's just such a ludicrous notion. The YouTube channel A Copy Art made a fascinating discovery of this really interesting clip from one of Shannon's past videos.
It's f***ing wild how people treat this literal child online. Like, there is a creator who is literally 14 who people want to call every name in the book because she acts like a creator who is 14 years old. She is 14 and people are having post threads about why she is the worst person in the world, and I'm just sitting there like, that's a child, guys. People often forget that pretty much until you are about 25, your mind is in a constant state of flux, and you are constantly learning and and changing and growing into yourself. People act like who you are and what you posted when you were 13, 14, 15. Like that represents you for the entirety of your life, and that you are going to stand by it to the end of the world.
What Emily's referring to here is the entire segment of Shannon's video that I and other people mock to shit on a live stream. The segment dedicated to proving Emily has a history of spreading false claims, bringing up posts Emily made in 2005 or earlier, around the same years I was born, as evidence of who Emily is as a person now and why she is an unreliable narrator. Obviously, to most people that would already seem insane, and you'd hope that Shannon would agree. And surprisingly, Shannon's so obviously going against the morals she upheld in the past that despite there being clips of Shannon talking about how kids' statements shouldn't be used as proof of who they are as a current person, Shannon still goes on to make this argument in her video, making her look much worse and like she's intentionally trying to make Emily look worse by bringing up points that even she doesn't agree with against Emily purely to attack Emily's character. It's obvious Shannon's main focus with this video is to negate all of the claims made against Anthony, her romantic partner, by Emily. However, the defenses Shannon presents that mean that Anthony should be cleared of any wrongdoing and make it impossible, as Shannon says, for Emily's story to be true, are easily refuted by Emily and make Shannon look like she was intentionally lying about aspects of the situation, which again does not look good for Shannon.
And now we get to this part of the video, the part where I found messages that I believe corroborate my retelling of the night my rape occurred. Aside from me literally showing you guys my phone, Shannon herself actually confirmed that these messages are real by using them as evidence in her own video. So we know now from both sides that these messages are from Anthony. For anyone who is still skeptical, I'll include a clip of my actual phone scrolling from the very top of the messages where Anthony identifies himself all the way down to the messages we're about to discuss. While I was skimming through old messages between Anthony and I stumbled upon a discussion about an illicit video I had sent him. This conversation took place on August 6th, 2014. I made a joke about Anthony having a fancy mustache and a glass of wine, and he mentions he doesn't drink. His fervent sobriety and refusal to be around someone who isn't also sober is something that is referenced in the tiny little paragraph dedicated to my rape at the end of the legal letter sent to me by Shannon's lawyer. So Anthony mentioning he doesn't drink does corroborate that belief, but only in a sense. 8 months earlier, in December of 2013, which is actually almost a full year after when I originally suspected the rape took place, I tell him that I've been drinking like a fool, and at that point in time I would have been using heroin or Suboxone. Suboxone is a crutch drug to help people get off of heroin by mimicking its effects in the body while not giving you the addictive sense of intense euphoria. I even mentioned taking Suboxone in that DeviantArt journal that Shannon used in her video as evidence against me. Actually, I said I was prescribed Subutex here. Subutex is just like Suboxone, except it doesn't contain naloxone. Naloxone being the drug that counteracts the pleasurable effects of an opiate. So users who take Suboxone and attempt to use heroin will immediately be put into withdrawal. Subutex is just pure buprenorphine. Buprenorphine being the drug that mimics the effects of opiates within your system without actually getting you high. Except you definitely can still get high. In fact, I even say it kind of gets you dopey in my DeviantArt journal. Not really the words of a sober person. Subutex can be even more dangerous to mix with alcohol because it's just pure buprenorphine. I just wanted to make that clarification. The cardinal rule of being on Suboxone is you do not mix it with alcohol. Every addict knows this can be super dangerous, almost as dangerous as mixing heroin and alcohol. AmericanAddictionCenters.org says alcohol and buprenorphine are central nervous system depressants. Taking them in combination leads to an enhancement of their effects. Side effects that might occur with buprenorphine use can be significantly increased in intensity and number when the drug is used in combination with alcohol. These side effects include issues with nausea, vomiting, and constipation, headache, blurred vision, dizziness, and fainting spells, increased sweating, heart palpitation, increased or decreased blood pressure, and an increased potential of myocardial infarction, decreased motor coordination, poor response times, and extremely impaired thinking processes, including issues with judgment. My first stint of sobriety started in September 2012, but over the course of the next few years afterwards, I would be an on and off user. I would use Suboxone for a couple weeks to keep from going into withdrawal, and I would get up on my high horse and talk about how I was sober and how my life was so much better sober, and then a few days later, I would stop taking the Suboxone and go pick up And so I wasn't really sober, but during the course of this time, there were tiny little glints of sobriety, but it obviously wasn't real sobriety. And now as I slowly piece this puzzle back together using messages and medical records and even some evidence from Shannon's own video, I realize now that I would have either been drunk and on heroin or drunk and on Suboxone, and either way, the side effects are intense. It's no wonder I had difficulty piecing this back together at first when I knew in my hardest of hearts, in my fucking core, that this happened. I tell him that I've been drinking like a fool, and that I wasn't drinking because I was trying to party, but because I was trying to escape, meaning escape from reality. From then on, I send him a few incoherent, clearly intoxicated messages complaining about an inappropriate encounter I had with my then boss. I didn't mention it here, probably because I was upset specifically about my boss, but this also would have been right in the middle of Bob and I taking a break from seeing each other. In the messages, I tell Anthony to call me, and that's where the conversation ends. I believe that night is when I asked him to come over. Due to all these factors adding up perfectly, I now believe this was probably the night the rape took place. The next conversation we had was initiated by Anthony, who sent me a sexually suggestive message, which I responded to in a sexual manner as well. This conversation took place only 5 days later, and at that point I would have just started seeing Bob again. Even though it was a stupidly classic "we were on a break" situation, I still felt guilty for having slept with Anthony and embarrassed that I was high and drunk. But I also felt guilty because I felt like I had led Anthony on. I didn't want to immediately shut down his sexual advances here because I felt like I had led him to believe we could now engage in a physical relationship again, and I was also afraid of him blowing up at me. So I kind of just slowly segued into talking about how I had started seeing Bob again. And I know there's going to be a very small percentage of people who will lose their mind over this, but this was Anthony's choice. I was very clearly a total train wreck here. So many things were going on in my life, and although he denies ever being around me when I wasn't sober, these messages illustrate that that just isn't true. This man, by his own admission, was sober and sound of mind, and he chose to have sex with me while I was intoxicated and not in the right frame of mind. She claims that my real sobriety date was in November 2012 and uses the lyrics from a song I wrote, sang, and posted in September 2016, specifically about my relationship with heroin, as confirmation of that date. The lyrics are 3 years in November, and she says that's further proof that my sobriety date was in November of 2012, except November 2016 minus 3 would be November 2013. She also did this using a clip from my "I Dated a Sociopath" video, which I uploaded in May of 2016. Did Shannon not know math? I think it's much more likely that she knew her math was incorrect. She was just hoping that no one would go back and fact check her on it. This is just yet another example of her throwing screenshots up on the screen and claiming one thing when the screenshots actually show something completely different. Not only that, but here's a court summons I received about a drug DUI I was charged with, showing the offense date as 12/8/12. With this evidence, it's obvious I was still using after the date that Shannon claimed. I was even using at the beginning of my relationship with Bob, which was in June of 2013. But you absolutely 100% have witnessed me picking up drugs, using drugs, not limited to just heroin.
It was awful. It was really difficult. I mean, to this day, I think about it because it was hard, especially in the very beginning, and seeing you. I mean, I didn't even know about the nodding thing before I saw it in person. I was never super comfortable, and it was awful. Yes, I was there for the heroin use.
This was initially an important and focal point for Shannon's defense, trying to present Emily as someone who'd lied about the sexual encounter between them and Anthony because it couldn't possibly have happened because Emily claimed to have been under the influence, but Shannon says that Emily couldn't have been because her sobriety date she'd paraded around publicly was not the same. Emily goes in depth, highlighting how Shannon had somehow done the math wrong, which is a little questionable as is, that Shannon just happened to do the math wrong on likely one of the most important points in defending such a serious argument. But also, Emily goes in depth about how Anthony had not only lied about never engaging with Emily in any way when she was intoxicated, because Emily had chats where she'd spoke vocally about being under the influence and Anthony had continued the conversation, but also Emily shows a conversation between her and Anthony after Anthony had discovered that Emily had been under the influence of alcohol or other drugs. Obviously, that completely shatters Shannon and Anthony's defense that Anthony wasn't aware of Emily under any influence of drugs, and also that he would never have engaged with her if she was. Alongside the fact that the dates were completely wrong that Shannon provided, and that Emily provided proof of a DUI from a later date showing that it was entirely possible that she could have been under the influence at the time of the sexual encounter. The sexual encounter goes completely back to a he said, she said, but with way more evidence falling in Emily's favor. And the fact that Anthony would lie about ever engaging with Emily under the influence is quite concerning. Now, Anthony could always say that he'd forgotten about this encounter, which would be a surprisingly lucky coincidence. Considering if he was as against drug use as he claims to be, he would probably remember that someone he'd engaged with had been taking drugs. It's incredibly scary how much evidence falls in Emily's favor in this situation. The fact that she has text leading up to what she believes to be the event, including the fact that she mentions the fact that she was on drugs, which completely negates Anthony's defense, but also that she has proof of sex encounters with Anthony despite him knowing that she had been under the influence on certain occasions. Not even to mention the fact that he would lie about knowing if she was under the influence, which really does not look good for how much truth he's telling on the entire rest of this accusation. But obviously it needs to be said that no one but Emily and Anthony know what happens on that night. That's something that will always likely remain a he said, she said, that will never truly be proven either way. And obviously I'm not going to make a claim either way because there simply isn't enough evidence for me to confidently swing my opinion either way. But I do think it is important to mention how much Anthony has seemingly lied about the supposed event that he claims didn't happen. It should be left up to you, the viewer, to decide how you feel on this situation and to take the evidence as you will. Though I think it should be said that people should not be theorizing on this event anymore, or trying to push people like Emily to keep talking about something that's likely so tragic towards them. Nothing more is probably going to come out of this conversation, and it should be left here instead of bringing it up as a constant reminder to the people involved. Emily's video also serves as a way of negating many of the character attacks that Shannon makes against Emily, one of those mainly being that Emily has accused many people in the past of, as Shannon puts it, abuse, and as such Emily is an unreliable narrator. Except Emily raises a fair point with why that's just complete bullshit, and Shannon just pulled the abuse that these people did completely out of her ass.
Though I must point out that Shannon's claims of who I did and did not call abusive were flat out wrong, and another example of her drawing conclusions by filling in the blank. A teenaged Emily over-dramatizing a long-standing tiff with another person does not an accusation of serious abuse make. There were times I didn't get along with someone and made the very common mistake of just saying thing bad instead of really looking into the nuance of the relationship. This does not equal a formal accusation of abuse. So Shannon, let me fix your little infographic really quickly. There. That's better.
Once again, Emily refutes this point with testimony that many of the people on this list that Shannon has accused Emily of accusing of abuse were simply not claims that Emily made of those people, which once again breaks apart one of Shannon's bigger arguments that's a character attack that many people thought was a legal defense for Shannon, and makes it much harder for Shannon to once again make Emily seem like an unreliable narrator. Though Shannon tries. One of the bigger points against Emily in Shannon's video was the claim that Shannon made that Emily had dated a 13-year-old at 17. Obviously, this would be reprehensible, and most people did immediately get a little concerned when Shannon made this claim, mainly because she had a clip of Emily admitting to doing such. And while obviously Emily that many years ago does not represent Emily now, it's still something that would be a justified concern for many people to have, and would warrant questioning towards Emily as to whether this was actually the case.
And the 13-year-old she dated when she was 17. She goes on to say this about all of her other relationships.
So that's a claim that Shannon makes later on in this video. Shannon alleges that Emily had an unhealthy relationship where she was 17 and dated a, I believe she says 13-year-old just there. That is, if true, probably something that's gonna damage Emily's reputation.
Penny was a beautiful, charming young girl. We got along incredibly well. She was exactly my type, both physically and mentally, or so I thought. And the only possible foreseeable downfall to our relationship at that time was that she was a little bit immature, and she was a little bit immature because she was 4 years my junior.
Emily released a response following this stream, alleging that she was actually the 13-year-old, and this was a video that was made as a sort of self-hate video. I'm not so sure on the validity of that, because that does seem like a more sketchy defense, but that all goes up to personal opinion, and if Emily can provide evidence to the contrary, I would be completely willing to accept that. Emily responds to this claim in this video in a much better way than she responded to previously when Shannon made this claim. When Shannon initially made this claim, Emily's response publicly was just that the roles were switched and didn't really provide any evidence to actually confirm this, which made it really just fall under an Emily versus Emily situation. It was very hard to know what the actual truth was, but Emily's come out with some evidence that defends her side and makes it seem like what Emily said, the role switch, was a lot more likely, with Emily even texting the person that was supposed to be the victim to expound upon what actually happened and prove the age gap really was flipped.
I want to briefly touch on a clip that Shannon presented in her video. It was a clip of me discussing a relationship I had when I was 13 with someone when they were 17. In this specific story time, I used the control reversing tactics I had discussed earlier, so I was discussing it as if I were the older party. What Shannon failed to include is this clip earlier in that same video.
So that's why I feel that a 13-year-old who was just about to turn 14 and a 17-year-old who had just turned 17 isn't that big of a deal. You're all essentially still being taken care of by your parents, and you're still relatively at the same maturity level.
I still have a lot of complicated feelings about this person that I was discussing in that video. And I feel like, yes, the relationship was still inappropriate, but that was more because of other power dynamic reasons that I won't go into. And I absolutely don't condone anything of the sort. But my general feelings around this person are complicated. But this person was not and is still not a terrible person, and we still get along to this day. I just really wanted to clarify that this person and I are much closer in age than originally portrayed in my video. It was a running joke among our mutuals at the time because the age gap at first glance seemed a lot larger than it actually was. This person obviously realizes that the relationship was inappropriate in nature and has since owned up to it. We've discussed it, and I don't hold any ill will against this person. If anything, I still feel embarrassed about how that interaction went down. I still really don't know how to feel about all of it. I know this person is anonymous, but still something within me felt that needed clarifying because I do still care about this person.
Obviously, if this really is to be taken as Emily's presented it, with Emily being the 13-year-old and the other person being the 17-year-old, with Emily saying that the age gaps are actually much more close, being more 14, 17, which is still a 3-year age gap, still obviously concerning nonetheless, I do feel like this claim kind of gets cleared, and the fact that Emily got them to basically testify through those messages that it really was the case as Emily presented it. While there's no direct mention of the age gap in that conversation, and because that person's anonymous, we can never know for sure. Because there is more evidence to Emily's side, I'm leaning towards believing Emily on this claim, and unless Shannon has something to the contrary, I don't see any other reason why not to. But it should obviously be stated that even if this claim genuinely was true about Emily, just like I said on the live stream, it wouldn't negate Shannon of wrongdoing. This is a very popular tactic from people like Prismate Luke, and I guess maybe they learned it from Shannon. The two-quote fallacy is a technique whereby you criticize the party that's criticizing you to make their criticism towards you hold less weight. But even if Emily was completely guilty of this heinous amount of actions, Shannon would still be just as wrong, and so would Anthony. That wouldn't be a defense or excuse for what actually happened in the situation that Emily alleges they were assaulted by Anthony in, and these character attacks should not and would not affect Emily's testimony on claims they made about Shannon.
I want to touch on some of what Shannon claimed about my relationship with my father and about my living situation. My father and I had a difficult relationship during my active addiction. There were many times he would tell me that I wasn't allowed back into his home if I was using, but then renege on that weeks or sometimes even days later out of concern for me. This is absolutely commonplace among parents who are struggling with a child in active addiction, and I don't blame him for what he felt he had to do back then. You were also there when things were starting to perk up and I got that job at the optometry place. And then I was fired. You were there. You either were the first person I called.
It was like, and I said this before, I swear to God, you couldn't get a break. A little bit of hope. You just a tiny bit. You got the job. We were so happy for you. And not 2 weeks later, yeah, you got fired. And I was overwhelmed with rage because I was like, what happened? What happened? Just, I didn't know. And you told me that your stalker, who you had told me that you had a stalker, like, I think before we'd met, but it was sort of unclear and it was sort of an on and off thing.
I had the stalker before we met, but I told you about it when we had met.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't like you were hiding it. It was just something like, hey, there's a person you should be aware of. I don't know who it is. Someone contacted them saying they were a customer and sent them, from what I remember at the time, had sent them the video. It had nothing to do with the cameo. It was that video. And they said, okay, well, we don't really want to sift through this because I think you'd probably contended that it wasn't actually a customer, that it was your stalker, but they're like, well, we don't want any drama. So thank you. Goodbye.
Which is fair. You know, I understand why.
Yeah.
Emily then interviews Bob to get more confirmation on her story about what happened when she was fired from her job, explaining that she was fired not because, as Shannon said, her camming, because someone had allegedly, a stalker, sent the indecent video, likely the bathtub video, to Emily's employer. Emily obviously told their employer that it was their stalker, and their employer let them go anyway because they didn't want to deal with it, which totally makes sense. But the fact that Shannon changed details to be camming to make it seem more unrealistic or impossible that this could have happened is really weird, and once again only looks bad on Shannon's front. I wish Shannon's video had more thought put into it if she was going to take this long to make it, to actually consider whether what she was saying made sense, and whether Emily could refute it as easily as she had. I find it really weird that Shannon changes so many details in this situation so blatantly, and actually just misquotes Emily at times. Like in Shannon's video, she actually puts quotation marks around the word camming to make it seem like Emily said she was fired by her employer for the camming work. But Emily never said that. Emily said it was an illicit video of some kind. And yet I'm still surprised that this situation somehow links back to a video of Emily Artful naked in a bathtub doing a One Piece review that got Emily cancelled by a bunch of troll anime creators who were afraid of a woman's body. How is that genuinely an integral part of this situation is somehow one of the biggest questions to be asked out of a situation with this many serious allegations.
Once I got into therapy, I learned two very important things. One, the relationship I had with Anthony was unhealthy. And two, the sexual encounter was a rape because and only because I was intoxicated when it happened. In the PDF letter that their lawyer sent me, Anthony even admits to a sexual encounter occurring after our breakup. I believe he did this because there is evidence of us planning meetups and speaking with one another long after our breakup. That way, if it ever went to court and I came forward with all of these messages, Anthony could say that he openly admitted to having a sexual encounter with me.
This is an important final note and probably the last clip I'll include in this video from Emily's video, mainly because it does highlight that Anthony admitted to a sexual encounter after their breakup, which does give more credence to the claims Emily made against Anthony, and it's very important to recognize that. I feel this is also a great example of Anthony only admitting to the bare minimum he can get away with to avoid any major claim, recognizing that Emily likely had messages of him admitting to sexual encounters or acknowledging that a sexual encounter was going to take place. Anthony admitted that he had, but he's very careful not to admit anything else and very clearly skirts around the line of admitting to anything involving alcohol or drugs. Obviously, this is my own opinion, but it does feel like Anthony maliciously left out some of this information purely to make his situation look better and his side more credible, like leaving out the fact that anything involving drugs had ever happened, despite the fact that, as we've seen in Emily's screenshots, it very likely did. Though this wasn't the only video released against Shannon's response, as Nicholas Diorio also released a response video, which included a previously undocumented secret document that Creepshow Art had created as a prior version of this script that includes a lot more hostility, but wasn't published and instead was somehow gained access to by a fake Creepshow Art that apparently got it from Shannon. I don't even know how that's possible, but I was aware of this document before it becoming public because another content creator I know reached out to me and told me it existed, but because it came from a fake account, it was hard to know it was the real Shannon. But considering information in it is undisputably private information that we now know was in Shannon's video, it does seem believable. I'm not going to play you that video in its entirety or even many of the clips from that video. I'd suggest you just watch Nick's video because there's so much in it that I couldn't include in this video in the time that it takes to make these videos. Check it out. Me and Nick are colleagues and I really appreciate some of the work he does for this platform, so go check out the video on his channel. But this is just some of my favorite moments from this video.
I want to thank absolutely no one. Tipster is a diseased hack who literally reached out to me for content that he disguised as an "I'm here if you need to talk." That much is obvious given how hard his dick got when he realized he could monetize my response to him privately. Why reach out in earnest feigning friendship when you can monetize your friend's downfall? Super appreciate how much thought you put into that though. Bet those views were worth it. Totally kidding, there's a reason everyone on YouTube surpasses you, and it's because your videos lack quality, insight, or anything worth commending. Thank you though, for the post that, "If Creepshow can prove she didn't do this, I will apologize. I'm waiting, ... letting me know that I was taking too long to prove I never owned CP. I am so sorry that me proving that Emily was slandering me took too long for you. I am sorry that I wasn't able to make this video on a fun little time frame for you so you could add it to your 10 upload a day schedule. That must have been so hard for you that I wasn't able to hire a PI and find all this information that proved my innocence in a day or two. I bet that really sucked, that you just had to sit there, getting comment after comment describing how you should kill yourself for things that were completely fabricated. Oh wait, that didn't happen to you. You just sat there and talked about it happening to me, your old pal Shannon. Weird. I do not accept your apology. I will never accept your apology. You are a terrible fucking person who I supported, and I hope you fucking realize that money means a lot more to you than actually being friends with people and being decent. You say you're a journalist? Everything I showed is public. Hell, Emily literally changed her story in front of you and had things on her Instagram that actively showed her lies, but you were too much of a crybaby to find it. Did you even pay attention to what she was saying in her video? Or were you just excited for the dog pile? Your Twitter @ has you being called a journalist. Sure, man, I buy that. Even bigger ups for not only sending people to harass my husband, who didn't fucking rape anyone and never stalked anyone is his goddamn life, as I proved, but doing so yourself. Do those couple of likes make you feel like a real man with a big boy brain and not a spineless little coward who cries online like a pussy? You are a champion for that. So happy to have known someone who just gets his little shrimp cock hard for spreading false allegations. You're so fucking smart. Amber Heard would love you.
Team Tipster's the best. This shot's for you.
Side note, you owe my husband the biggest apology. Saying you would apologize to me for reporting on false allegations that were centered around him is like me tweeting that I would apologize to your wife for saying you murdered my entire family falsely. I fully did not expect you to realize that, given how stupid your statement was. So here I am telling you, you owe my husband an apology. You owe your fans an apology. And mostly, you owe the fucking world an apology for making such repetitive, lazy content that lacks any inspiration or passion. You really should be ashamed of yourself for simply persisting on this platform.
And with that being said, I think this is the first time that an e-girl's turned down Tipster, so I'd like to see some Tipster support in the comments. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I do appreciate all the support on videos like this one. Obviously, these videos take a lot of time, and I really do appreciate the people who sit the whole way through them, support them, and watch my other content. So if you'd like to subscribe to my channel to watch some of my other content, that would be highly appreciated. I make videos like this all of the time. I make other videos that are more personal. I do whatever on this channel. So if you want to watch anything, you'll probably enjoy something if you enjoyed this video. You can also check out my Twitter if you'd like to see me over there, support me over there, get to see some funny tweets from me, etc, etc, etc. But the biggest thing I want to promote to you is that video I posted yesterday, the sponsored one, the one that clearly didn't go to notifications and got absolutely destroyed in the algorithm. If you could check that out and support it, that would be highly, highly appreciated. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a video about YouTube ads. It's really cursed. It's great. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.
Says she wanna rock with it like me. I'm a stylish guy. Spend a little guap with it like me. We can catch a fly. Says she wanna rock with it